Hello. He's just said hi. Hi, everyone. I know that this is after lunch, so we have a very difficult task ahead of us. Hi, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm super excited about this session, trends in EV charging and batteries. I'm always learning in this subject that it's much more complex than I thought it would be when I started working on this 10 years ago. Involves so many different skills from my team and everyone that I didn't think it was the case. No. So in this session, we're going to try to answer a few questions here, and let's see how we're going to do. How can the transition to e-mobility be supported through investments in charging infrastructure? What are the latest technologies used in charging stations? What is the business model for battery as a service? What is the current status on recycling of batteries? What is the role of the public and private investments in accelerating the transition to e-mobility? And how do policy frameworks support infrastructure development? So we're going to touch, these are not exactly the questions, but those are the questions that we're trying to answer here. And I want to present to you our distinguished panelists. Jason Zimbler is the Senior Director of Light Duty Vehicles of CalStart. Erica Myers is the Executive Director of Charging Interface Initiative North America. I think there's a nickname here, but Imran Sikandar is the Secretary of Transport and Mass Transit Department of the Government of Punjab, Pakistan. Welcome. Josh Wall, the CEO of Ampersand. Well, thank you. Is just the pronunciation or is just a bad spelling? And then Christina is right there on your right. She's the Director of Global Electric Mobility from WRI. And Matt Dowse, hi again, Matt, Partner and Chair, Transportation Practice Group, Windows Marks. He was the former New York City Taxi Commissioner. And I had a parallel conversation with him one day, and apparently he was the first one to install the GPSs in the taxis, which in 2008 were the only big data we had, so that was a big fight. Anyway, so let's start this conversation. Jason, I'll start with you. Tell me a little bit about how it is to engage multiple levels of government, because that's when you're dealing with this subject, that's what you have to do to create these incentives for this to flourish, coordinating with the stakeholders. What are the stakeholder expectations? Tuning approaches. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about this?
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here. And this is something that I've been working on for many years. And there's no silver bullet. There's no easy answer. But there's a lot of tireless work to get to an incentive program as an end result, and then even further to get to one that's successful and achieves its goals of dollars deployed, carbon reduced, whatever the objectives are. We administer at CalStart, help governments design and administer incentive programs like this. And I come from New York State government before CalStart, so I've been in these types of development work, doing this type of work to get these programs off the ground for some time. I know well from where I sit now that when we're looking at putting a new program together, and I'll say just as a specific example, we're administering a few different programs to assist states in getting more ride-hail electrification out, converting more Ubers, Lyfts, taxis to electric. And in order to do that, a regulation can certainly achieve some of that outcome, but an incentive is a really important lever. To see those incentive programs come to light, that's a very long road, and in one program on its own also does not necessarily achieve the outcome. It's a stacking, as your prompt indicated. There may be some municipal level incentives that couple with some state incentives or some utility incentives and then a federal incentive together, because as we know, the business case is not necessarily immediately available as a standalone in the absence of incentives. So what we're trying to do now is continue to build a landscape where there are more incentives to do things like ride-hail electrification, and that involves some campaigning. It involves working with advocates and going and doing meetings with the community and with stakeholders in government. It involves responding to dockets and making comments in utility commissions and responding to legislative comment periods, and then working with municipal officials, state officials, to help them identify where funding might come from, whether it's going to come from taxpayer or ratepayer, or if it's absorbed by revenues from a program itself. In the case of a new California program for ride hail, surcharges on TNC rides will help fund incentives for both purchasing EVs as well as building infrastructure, charging infrastructure. So there are a number of ways in the program design, a sort of a spectrum of options, and but unlocking those and getting from inception all the way to a program takes all of these many steps, and then an allocation or an appropriation has to happen either at the state level or at a federal level, and those things have to be carefully ushered and moved forward and with a lot of care. So when we're through all of that, then a program is live, and usually a solicitation happens. A nonprofit or a firm like ours is involved in helping to administer something like that, and then we start to advise the community on how to stack incentives that may exist and produce the multi-layered approach that gets us to the transition towards EV.
Thank you very much, Jason. So now, you touched, I mean, obviously part of this is the charging, the charging infrastructure. And I, I have to confess myself that standards are something that make me awake at night. I was renovating my apartment in São Paulo, Brazil, 10 years ago, and then they changed the plugs. And then I traveled to the US, not for that, but I bought a full bag of old charging electrical plugs, so I could bring on and it was, hopefully I'm not going to go to jail now, it's prescribed already. but that's what I did, because it made me furious that the standard was changing and everything would have to be retrofit anyways. So Erica, why don't you talk a little bit about how is this effort to establishing, enforcing these standards, and then facilitating that the industry adheres to that? Tell us a little bit about this.
Absolutely. So my name is Erica Myers, and again, I'm the executive director for an organization called the Charging Interface Initiative, also known as CHARIN. We are an international standards and interoperability trade association for the EV charging industry. So basically, anybody who does anything related to the EV charging ecosystem is a CHARIN member. And our goal ultimately is one global charging standard, which sounds like a super ambitious goal, because it is. But it was created 10 years ago, largely due to the proliferation of charging hardware and software standards that did not align, that created additional complexities and additional cost for manufacturers that trickled down, obviously, to the consumer. And our goal ultimately in this industry is to get more people into electric vehicles. So we have to eliminate every single barrier in that path, because change is really hard. Change is scary when you're making a big investment in something like a bus or a car or a cargo van or something like that. You have to make sure that the person that's driving it feels comfortable with switching the technology, and that they know how to charge and they know where to charge, and that everything is super simple. Unfortunately, right now, we're in a situation where, because this is such a young industry, we are brand new. Like, if you look across the entire 100+ years of the automotive industry, this is like very, very young. We're still figuring things out, right? We still have to figure out a way that we can bring everybody along. And standards are the way to do that. So if we get alignment across the globe around a charging connector or a charging software standard, we can be able to scale much more quickly. And that's what CHARIN has been able to do. We've been able to bring everybody to the table and really create alignment around a communication protocol called ISO 15118, which creates a lot of additional opportunities and functionality for the consumer, makes it really easy to charge, super simple. And then on the hardware side, we are seeing some transition here in North America with what's called the North America Charging System, or NACS. But globally, we're seeing still a lot of alignment around what's called CCS, the Combined Charging System. And now we're in this process of seeing another standard called the Megawatt Charging System, which will help unlock the next generation of heavy-duty charging, specifically for Class 7 and 8 trucks. This suite of standards will be finished this year, and it will allow a large semi-truck to charge in under 20 minutes, which is pretty radical. And it also can be used for off-road as well. So we're starting to see the mining and the maritime industry also converging around the megawatt charging system.
Thanks, Eric. I'm just so happy somebody's doing that. You have all my support. Now let's move to Pakistan and hear a little bit from Secretary Imran. What is Pakistan doing? What is sort of what is the type of policy that you guys have been supporting there? And how do you see working with the private sector? Obviously this is a very multi-stakeholder subject, as we said. Over to you.
Thank you very much. To begin with, just to give a context of the country. So Pakistan is a lower middle income country, 250 million population. Probably we are the fourth largest country in the world. We are a federation of 4 provinces, and the transport function is a function delegated to the provinces. So I come from the province of Punjab, which is the largest province in the country. And it's a 120 million people province. And I am head of the transport department, a civil servant, and I regulate and try to improve the transport sector within the province of Punjab. So our challenge for EV transition has been triggered by the fact that we are not at the edge of a climate crisis, we are actually in the middle of one. So the problem with Punjab and that region is the poor air quality. The PM 2.5 particulate matter air quality index, which a normal indicator is anything below 100. And our average consistent throughout the year is more than 300. And many a times during the year, we are categorized as the most polluted city, which is the capital Lahore, or the most polluted region in the world. And in the last 10 years, we have actually started to experience a new season, which we call the smog season. So smog is a mixture of smoke and fog. And for 3 months, the situation is so bad that many a times the indicator crosses 1,000 benchmark, which is 10 times more than a healthy. We have to shut down schools. We have to cancel flights. The visibility is very poor, and the hospitals are crowded with pulmonary disease patients. So that's the kind of challenge which is forcing us to take actions very quickly. What we are trying to do is, other than the regulatory part of having policies which encourage EV, lifting of duties on electric vehicles, trying to electrify the government fleet. We are now inducting more than 3,000 public buses, which are all electric. We are now developing 6 bus rapid systems, which are all electric. We are in the process of negotiating a program with the World Bank called Punjab Clean Air Program, under which we will be replacing around 120,000 two-wheelers and three-wheelers, all electric, buying back the old ones, scrapping them, providing a financing instrument, and encouraging people to uptake it. But the challenge here is, and the reason why I am here and I would like to talk about, is not just thumping on what we are doing, but actually raise before this very learned audience what are the barriers. As a policymaker, what limited choices I have, how many a times the industry or the academia is unable to support a country like us because of the scale of this challenge. So Punjab has 24 million registered vehicles, out of which 20 million are two-wheelers, three-wheelers, all internal combustion. And replacing them or encouraging them is such a costly intervention that we just do not have the money for. And private financing, not yet available. The banks are not willing to fund two-wheelers or three-wheelers. And this is just the number of the registered vehicles. So we have like maybe millions more who are unregistered. So such is the scale of challenge. So before this audience, before the very people who have solutions, I want to raise the issues, and I want to raise what are the barriers which are stopping me from achieving my target. So we have committed to our target of this 30 by 30, of at least 30% sales would be electric by year 2030. But right now, we're even less than 1%. And unless something is done drastically, unless there's a technology shift, which is much cheaper, financing options, I don't think that we will be able to achieve that target. So I want to be the devil's advocate here and raise the problems and try to find solutions.
Yes, it's good to have a reality check. No, I think the levels of pollution that I've seen in South Asian cities are just something that I had never experienced before, and it's really so public transport projects and electric transport projects, they tick all the World Bank boxes. They are mitigation projects, they are air quality projects, they are many times gender inclusive projects. So really is, and I think that the angle, you're right, the angle is air quality. That's how we sell these projects in these countries. Thank you very much for your vision and experience. So let me go on to Josh Whale. Tell us a little bit about real world business insights. How do they differ from most policy expectations? What we were trying to achieve with the policy expectations? What's the reality on the ground? And how can we scale EV adoption in the developing world?
Right. So my name's Josh Whale, CEO at Ampersand. We are an electric two-wheeler energy company. We were the first of our kind in sub-Saharan Africa. We sold our first motorcycles in May of 2019. We were the first company in the world to build a lithium iron phosphate battery pack for two-wheelers, and specifically targeting the high charge and discharge rate, the safety, the lack of cobalt, conflict minerals. And so what we do is we operate a network of battery swapping stations in Kigali and Nairobi. Currently have about 8,000. Just today we built our 8,000th battery pack. Our motorbikes cover the distance to the moon and back every day, about 1.5 times a day. So very, very intensive usage, and that's exactly why we focused on this market. We had our first quarter of EBITDA positive in Q4 of last year. About 550 staff. We have a proprietary battery pack, so we have a lot of embedded tech in the battery to manage the battery fleets in real time. So we use predictive AI to anticipate demand across the network, to also ramp up charging speed and ramp down charging speed. We do about 100,000 battery swaps a week. So this is essential to efficient management. Also, because equity capital in particular is in such short supply, we have to be very, very efficient with every dollar we get. Hence, also the prioritization of profitability over a lot of over expansion and other things. We also now are working with 8 different motorcycle manufacturers to integrate our batteries into their vehicles. We, until now, have manufactured all of the vehicles as well, but really we see our core value proposition and role in the value chain. The big value add really is on the energy side. It's the batteries, it's the network of swap stations, and it's the software, the brains that power the whole thing. We have about 7,000 customers on our waiting list today in Kigali, but we're stock out, again, because of the lack of equity capital. Everybody's kind of in the funding space has run to the debt side of the boat, and then they're looking back to the other side of the boat going, who's standing on the other side to give me my 2-to-1 DE ratio? So we have a lot of debt available, but the equity has been very slow. I'm happy to say that IFC has been very positive conversations with them so far on that, but there's definitely an imbalance, and this is across equity in Africa as well. Government in Rwanda has banned petrol motorcycle registrations in Kigali for motorbike taxis. Motorbike taxis make up about half of all road traffic in the country. Something that's fascinating that's just recently happened is that because we are about 35% cheaper per kilometer than the petrol bikes, is that the electric guys are now undercutting, guys and girls, are undercutting the petrol riders. And so they're by about 20%. Now, 20% is about the margin that those petrol guys and gals were making before. So we're now seeing a wholesale shift towards electric very, very rapidly. So it's a very, very exciting time. I think we've now proven that it works. We've proven that it's profitable. We've proven the customer demand. We've got the world's largest electric vehicle maker, BYD, working with us to manufacture our new batteries, and 8 different motorbike companies. So it's really happening. So it's a very exciting time.
Thanks, Josh. Very nice to see the profitability of the business in a lower income setting. So that's a business not only for the big ones. That's great. Matt, let's go to you now. What do you think are the biggest regulatory and policy challenges in expanding EV charging infrastructure, especially in urban areas? And then how do we think we can ensure charging infrastructure meets the needs of the high mileage commercial fleets, taxis, and rideshare vehicles? How do you think that the private sector, what's the role of the private sector, and the policymakers, what can they do? A lot of questions. Yes.
Yeah, I'll try to condense all that. So Bianca, I'm glad you mentioned GPS, because every time when the taxi drivers are a tough crowd, everything you do, they call for your resignation. So after we got through being sued on, spying on the drivers with the GPS and the data set, Mayor Bloomberg and I mandated, as I was, privileged to be one of the co-authors of, I don't know if any of you heard of Plan YC. It was New York City's first ever sustainability plan under former Mayor Bloomberg, and we mandated hybrid electrics at the time. Now, if you think about it, there's no chicken and egg thing going on there. There's, a lot of charging stations that, pretty much, for EVs are popping up here and there. But back then, you could just go to a regular fuel pump, right? So there was no infrastructure issue. There was no issue whatsoever, but they fought us on it. We went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court because of the way the laws are in the U.S., the federal, the Clean Air Act and EPCA, states and cities, with the exception maybe of California, because they have a special exemption, my friend on the end, basically you can't mandate these things or any type of emissions. And we lost. But in the interim, because of the gas crisis and the high price of fuel in the 2000s, we ended up turning over 70% of the fleet. So when it comes to sustainability, these are great success stories, but now we have a problem. And I have a lot of different hats. I'm a transportation lawyer. I represent companies in the space. We do consulting. I run the international regulatory group called ITR, which is all of the licensing regulators for taxis, shuttles, and Ubers, DDs, and Grabs. So we do best practices, and we have congestion mitigation principles, which I'll talk about. I'm also been teaching sustainable transportation at the City University of New York for over 10 years. So I've been in a very unique perspective of having been a former government person doing this, academic lawyer, and this is a problem that stems from governance. The issues that we have in the ride-hail industry and the taxi industry right now are lack of infrastructure, range anxiety, not having enough and not enough charges that charge fast enough. Everybody wants level 3s. A lack of business models that support this. One of my clients is Revel. Has anybody heard of Revel? Right, so their business model is based upon getting real estate, having charging stations open to the public and for their drivers. And then there's another client they have that, my friends from New York City DOT have a pilot program going on with this company called It's Electric. So to solve some of these problems, I did some work for the energy entity in New York State called NYSERDA. We got all the stakeholders in the room, light duty, trucks, taxis, and we identified what the problem was. The problem is that there's no plan. The NEVI funding program was great, but it basically said, put your charging stations near a highway and anybody can apply for the money, and here it is. There was not there's a governance problem. There wasn't a person at the table saying, here's where the public and the private sector need to work on putting our charging stations. Because in our industry, time is money. We need to make sure that we have services. These people can't afford the EVs. The EVs are more expensive than the petroleum vehicles. So they can't afford them. They're really concerned that they're not going to be able to charge up in time. And basically there's not enough charging stations, and they haven't been placed in the right places. So going back to your original comment about GPS, New York City, California, maybe a couple of other cities and states in the US and around the world have enough data to figure out where the drivers are going. Okay, but a lot of cities and states don't have that data. Most of them don't. So the solution here is we have to look at everything on the table. Number one, there should be a transportation czar in each state or city that sits down with the private sector. Like the city should be opening up their city parking garages like they do in San Francisco for charging stations. The private parking operators in cities should be at the table, okay, planning out where they should be putting the charging stations. And of course, this company, It's Electric, bypasses all of the grid problems. The grid is very fickle in New York City. Around the corner from my law office, you can do a charge in 20, 25 minutes for a level 3. You go 3 blocks to the east and it'll take you an hour and a half. Okay, so to address that issue, there's a company that's actually putting level 2 charges on the streets in Brooklyn and Queens where the drivers live. So we have to look at all of these different approaches, but there needs to be, I think in America in particular, because it's very disjointed, we don't have a London TfL. We don't have a Singapore LTA. We have multiple agencies dealing with these problems. And that is the number one problem, aside from the bureaucracy that comes into play with utilities. So we have the data in some cities to do this, but we need to look at all solutions, level 2, level 3, plot this out on a map and get it done that way. And I think that's not happening. It's certainly not happening in New York City. And this is a problem. And I hate to be the naysayer on this thing, but it is a chicken and egg problem. You need to build the infrastructure, and we pushed it too hard in the US, and the industry and the ITR support incentives. Exempt them from congestion pricing. Let them go into HOV lanes. Do things to make it easier for the people that are using the EVs and incentivize them, and have the subsidies pay for the vehicles as well in our industry, and maybe it might work.
Thanks, Matt. There's so much knowledge here. I think you guys are also, New York is going to go to the Supreme Court again, perhaps now, no?
There's so many of them.
Yes, the most important one now. Okay, thank you very much. There's so much knowledge here. I hope you guys are preparing your questions for the audience, because we did this very fast and efficient, so you could have time for that. Christina, let me go over to you now. We talked about, and I said that some of these projects, they tick all the boxes, like quality, mitigation, equity, inclusion, et cetera. And then there's the battery issue, right? And everyone, there's always a conversation about this at the end. But there is the battery and the minerals and this issue, no? So I wanted you to talk a little bit about the experience from WRI, on this, the battery circularity and recycle reuse, no? How can we extend second life spans for batteries, and what should the governments be doing to make sure that this is happening?
So thank you, Bianca. Thank you everyone for being here. Sorry. So I'm not an expert in batteries itself, but it's part of the EVs things that are happening. I'm going to share a little bit what you are seeing that's happening on batteries right now worldwide. And one challenge, as Bianca was saying in the beginning, that you're learning every single day. So we are having a lot of EVs, bigger ones, smaller ones, and we are seeing right now that we are ending in a lot of the places the first life of the batteries, and we need to start really doing recycling and reusing these batteries for storage or any other things. But the economic case right now, it's being difficult to do it because batteries, the new ones, are being much more cheaper year by year. That's really good and much more efficient. So we are seeing that we have a huge effort that we need to put in place right now to work also with manufacturers on how we can make batteries in an easier way to be able to recycle the minerals. Because in the way that they are assembling the batteries, we are seeing a lot of the places, the resources needed to be able to extract the minerals are too expensive. So then in the end, we are not reusing these minerals to any other purpose. We are having some circularity around. Policymakers are doing the circularity and putting in place policies in a lot of the different countries. But a huge effort that we are doing, and our team in India is around those things, some of them, in country level policies that the entire ecosystems need to come together to make sure that those batteries are going to have the end life of the end of life cycle in a proper way. Because we are seeing, as I was saying, that economic case is not being part of it, even though we are saying that in the end of the life, we can do storage. We are not using a lot for that because new batteries are cheaper, as I said. And the minerals itself are, as I just said too, are not being able to reuse. So we are starting, I was saying in India, the Battery Alliance 360 that's helping all the ecosystem to come together and creating those policies, because it's not something that the government can do by themselves, because they need all the ecosystems to work together to be able to create the policies, but also to, for now on, how we can work with manufacturers to do the batteries in a way that's easier disassemble them in the end of the life cycle. And on the minerals itself, we have some studies, not from the WRI, but worldwide, showing that if you can reuse those minerals, we can go to about reducing the minerals need worldwide for batteries to achieve our climate goals by 2050 for more than 30%. So if you don't do that, we need to extract much more minerals. And then we have the job problems in mining. That's another conversation that's really in-depth on how we are using those minerals, how much mining we're still opening to be able to have those batteries. So we need to be more efficient to reuse those minerals for the next generations of batteries that are coming in, and working with the manufacturers. That's a big part of it, as Erica was talking about charging, creating standards or something on the batteries, not creating standards itself, because each OEM manufacturers of batteries have their own profitability and all those things, but creating the awareness that the way they are doing the cells, it's making much more difficult to recycle the minerals in the end of the life cycle. So we need to work to create some minimum requirements that they can build the batteries in a way that we can use those minerals in the end of the life cycle as part of this package. So it's one more thing, Bianca, that we are seeing that we need to start talking much more about that, because we are recycling, as I was saying. So it's not that it's not happening, but the number of batteries that we have in the market are growing so fast, and we are not being able to create all the processes in the economic case that makes sense to reusing these minerals and batteries for other purpose or that. And I'm not saying not only about the batteries of EVs, these go for the worldwide batteries. So everyone has a phone that we change 3 years, something around that, maybe a little more or less. And all those minerals are being hard to re-extract to use again on that. So it's a huge conversation that you're seeing. It's happening, but we need to accelerate this conversation to be able to create the economic case, but also to be able to reduce the needs of minerals that we have for the next years to be able to achieve our climate goals through e-mobility. So yeah, it was a general understanding, but it's a lot going on. A lot of resources we also have in the global level, the Battery Alliance that's discussing those kind of things. It's really something that in our transport conversations, we are not going in depth in the battery itself, but we need to bring this a little bit more since the beginning of the project, so we can have the next bench of batteries coming in already with this thinking through to be able to reuse those minerals.
Absolutely right, Christina, because we can't wait until we have the scale to start thinking of those things. Now, those things have to be. I see Jason making lots of notes here, and and sometimes when not exactly what you said, Christina, but others say, a little bit of. I guess that there's always, like this California, New York differences, land use, etc. Do you wanna compliment anything, Jason, or just comment on what you heard? You were the first. I yes.
Those comments were right on point, and we are working. I talked somewhat about ride-hail electrification, but I'll just plus one what's happening there, because we at CalStart are also helping to build the battery supply chain up in California and nationally, and also working to try to advance those standards for second life, for end of life, to ensure circularity. We know now that there are certain materials that aren't economic to recycle, and it's only made harder if they're not thought of in the production phase, how they could be stripped down more easily. And so we're trying to advance that in collaboration with the GBA and with the DOE in the US, and with the California legislators. So big plus one there.
Thank you very much. So I want to open to the public. Any questions? Do we have a mic?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Seth Contreras, New York City Department of Transportation. Question for my friend and colleague, Matt, also for Erica. So yeah, at New York City DOT, I'm Senior Advisor for Innovation. So I help do a lot of basically bridge working partnerships between public and private. And I agree, governance is a big issue right now. But related to e-bike battery swap charging, one thing we pulled a record last year. We launched the first e-bike charging outdoor pilot for delivery workers last year in record time. We did it in less than a year. We selected the companies, we found the locations, engaged with fire department, recruited the test users, did that all in 1 year. Normally something like that will take 2 to 4 years. But one thing I want to get to is standardization. I have a question on standardization and a question on operations and maintenance, because not to throw New York City under the bus, but we have 3 really good programs going on right now. The Con Edison curbside charging pilot, that in some locations, the sweet spot for utilization curbside charging, you want to try to get to at least 30%. There were some locations that were at a utilization 90% in New York City, not just in Upper West Side Manhattan, but even in Jackson Heights, Queens, in lower income areas. That's one program. Fast charging at some of the garages as well with the New York State Power Authority. We have one in Lower Manhattan. We have one in Long Island City. Another one is opening up next month, Earth Day. But upcoming is we're trying to unlock this charging and fueling infrastructure grant from US DOT to get $15 million to deploy the largest curbside charging in North America, 500 chargers curbside. The challenge I see that with that though down the road is standardization, that we're going to have to choose the right private partner to do this with, maybe a couple. But if I could just count down right now, there's at least 6 EV charging companies I can think of. It's Electric, Voltpost, Chargy, Connected Curb, EV Connect, Con Edison, the Flow Charger. There's a lot to choose from. It's almost like going to the grocery store and there's 100 flavors of vanilla to choose from, each doing their own system, their own standardization, their own. And so question I want to get to there is like, how do we address that? Like what can we do to get to that standardization? And then what can we do on the operation and maintenance? Because that tends to be something that is overlooked, and San Francisco is battling that right now. Like half of the time their chargers are obsolete, not working. And that's just like a huge failure right now.
So on the standard side, I'll talk real quick about curbside charging. So curbside charging is super important for those of us who don't have a dedicated space to charge at home or at work. So you need some place, if you're normally parking in the street, then you need a place in the street to charge. And unfortunately, in the US, we haven't had a really good model to choose from until recently. So one of the great things about international standards is that you can pick and choose from some of the best usage of different technologies and apply them here. And one of the great things that we've seen in Europe is something called Bring Your Own Cable, BYOC is what it's also known. And that's where you can have your own cable connector to a pedestal. So there's a standardization between the cable and the pedestal, and it can use any connector that you have affiliated with your car. So if you're using a CCS car, you can use that. If you have a CHAdeMO, you can use that. If you have a NAC system, you can use that. So there's like a lot of versatility that is enabled with something like Bring Your Own Cable. That is a common practice in Europe, very common, but we have just started to standardize it here in the US. The standard will be finished this year, hopefully within the next few months. And so I would like to think that that's like one great example of how standards are really important here. Of course, interoperability, making sure that those pedestals are working correctly between those different standards is, of course, also really critical. And so but I'll leave it at that. I think that's a great example.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Seth and Commissioner Rodriguez, who was here yesterday, doing a great job It's not just about the funding that I mentioned and how disjointed that is in the planning, but they are doing great things on the street. And then there's also the operational maintenance side. And in our industry, it's very haphazard. There aren't all big fleets that run ride hails and taxis. They're mostly independent contractor, individual drivers. So like the It's Electric solution, which goes through the utilities red tape, it has a bring your own cable component to it to avoid vandalism. And it's also away from the building, and they just run the electric line from the residents, and the homeowner gets a cut of the charging. So that's like a great solution for the outer boroughs outside of Manhattan where the drivers live. But let's not forget, especially in California and in New York, a lot of people don't understand how things have evolved with the taxi and the ride hailing industry in the United States. They have evolved to a rental model. Insurance is very high. Drivers don't want to buy new cars anymore, and they don't want to pay for that insurance and be responsible for those operations. So in New York City, most of the Ubers and Lyfts that are running around with the ride hailing are owned by private companies that have private equity and have a fleet where they have the permits, and they don't work for Uber, they don't work for Lyft, they have their own companies, and tens of thousands of vehicles are rented out to drivers on a daily or a weekly basis, but they control the vehicle. So they buy the vehicles, they finance it, they get unique insurance models. That's the future. Avis and Hertz and Enterprise have been doing that in California and all over the country. And that's where I think the clearest path to getting, from an operational standpoint, the EVs on the road with the fleets, because dealing with the drivers, it's like, you can, and there are things you can do, but it's going to take a long time to do that. But, I think to sum it up, you need to look, there's so many people that need to be at the table. That's why I keep talking about, we need like an EV czar in each state and city that has real responsibilities and accountability, meaning that the mayor or the governor or the person in charge tells the other agencies you must report to that person, because otherwise you have to couple the money that's coming with proper planning, with all the experiments that Seth is doing in New York City, and try to figure out there's no one size fits all solution. If you want to get where you need to go, you kind of like have to phase it out, plan it out, and do all of that together. Oh.
Great.
State your name and then the question.
Perfect. Yes. Understood. Hello, panel. My name is Ryan Sklar. I work with NG Impact. I would love if everybody on the panel could give me a sentence, or even better, a word that describes what you see in your area, your niche related to electric vehicles, the largest breakthrough or the most inspiring thing that's come out of your specific field, whether that's charging standards or battery swapping or things specific to local government or regulation. Let's say the last 2 years, what's been a sentence or a word that describes the thing that has been the most exciting or the most interesting or monumental in your specific niches?
Thank you very much. Let's go to the other question and then they think.
Hi, my name is Aisha from UMD College Park. And in the transportation demand management space, we've had a litany of problems with our current operator Blink for electric vehicle charging, but there's big demand for over 3,000 scooter users to have EV charging for them too. We want to try to figure out a solution that's equitable and affordable for us at the university. And so if you have any suggestions for the scooters, bikes, and personal electric vehicles of the world, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, that's good questions, and then come back.
All of them, Bianca? Okay, great. Thanks so much. I'm Joanna Moody. I'm a transport specialist with Latin America and the Caribbean region. And I want to just ask, on behalf of our panelist from Pakistan who raised the problems, what are some of the other business models that you've seen that are successful in low and middle income countries when it comes to fleet electrification or battery charging, and what can we learn from them? I think we've heard the great example of Ampersand, but any others that we should be documenting, learning from, and putting in front of policymakers so that they can make the case and help to reach their targets. Thanks.
Joanna, we have 2 more questions, right? So I'm going to
pause.
Go back to the panel and then go who wants to take? Well, should we start from the last one and then yes?
Yeah. So I think that's a great question, and we try to look in our neighborhood for immediate solutions. And India is a great example of how they have electrified some of their fleets. And because of the similar governance arrangements that we share with India, I think there's a lot to learn. So Delhi state has launched a program called Delhi Switch, which, and I think they have encouraged establishment of OEMs, which are the original equipment manufacturers within India. And these OEMs are now providing the vehicle for electric taxis. And that is exactly something that we are trying to replicate now. And we are encouraging OEMs to establish plants within Punjab, trying to give them concessions. And if we have a range of electric vehicles produced locally, we hope that the cost will be much low and it will be easy for us to adopt. So already, so the good thing is this space is changing very quickly. So already there is one company manufacturing vehicles within Pakistan, and a few are about to establish. And I think in a couple of months, we will have some good products available. So, learning from our neighborhood probably is the most suitable for us.
Maybe Josh, you want to take the other question? Yeah, and perhaps comment on this one. Yeah, if you
on the scooters for the Blink one. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very different context, and some of the costs are much higher in the United States than they are in Kenya and Rwanda. But certainly, what we did from the beginning was focus on commercial use vehicles. I think that's very different from a lot of what we saw with companies like Gogoro and a lot of the companies also in India initially was focusing on consumer vehicles because that was the bulk of the market. But for an electric vehicle, your time to recover your cost of capital is infinitely better with a commercial vehicle. Our customers do about 200 kilometers a day. Your average commuter in India does 20 kilometers a day. So 95% of the time, that battery, expensive batteries, are sitting there. It's not saving anybody any money. It's not making anybody any money. It's not pulling any carbon out of the sky. So I've very much focused on commercial vehicles. So the most successful models that we've seen in India, companies like Battery Smart, have also focused on the three-wheelers, on the commercial vehicles as well. So that would be my advice. Whether battery swapping can be made to work in the US, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I don't know enough to be able to really comment. Happy to talk through it with you and run some numbers. And a breakthrough, I think, is just profitability. We've demonstrated that we've raised a total about $20 million in equity capital, another 20 in debt. And we're a profitable EV company building real tech using AI, world-leading battery tech, and so on and so on. I think on average in the United States, if you're a profitable EV company that's actually building real tech and has a moat, I mean, our customers prefer us 8 out of 10 more than another company that's raised $200 million. So that it's demonstrable the value. It's reduce our capex and opex by 20%, like real tech, like with concrete applications. We'd be worth $500 million, $1 billion, right? Africa just doesn't get a look in, and including in India. I suppose in the current context, it means that we can, we're a great value for money.
Thanks very much, Josh. I think we can get to two more questions, and then we end with the sentences, or no? I think that would be a good yes.
Thank you, Bianca. I'm Thais Fonseca. I'm a transport specialist at the World Bank based in Brazil. My question is to Cristina. Cristina, as you know, we are supporting São Paulo in the transition for e-buses. We are financing there. It's a co-financing with IDB. And now the city is facing a huge challenge because the buses are coming, but we don't have charging infra yet. So what are the best models or alternatives that São Paulo could adopt, or even other cities in Brazil, to avoid what is happening with São Paulo? Thank you.
Cristina, can we get two more questions? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Kaustubh Gosavi. I am with WRI India. It's good to see that the developing nations and the developed nations have similar issues in EVs. So this question is for Erica. one of the things we work with the national and subnational level, and one of the things that we keep hearing from charge point operators is with India's penetration right now, which is around 7% approximately, and our utilization for chargers is around 3 to 5% depending on where they have been placed. We've been working with, the CPOs have been working with the municipal corporations as well as the state on where the charging infrastructure needs to be deployed. The biggest problem they're facing is to hold a private equity because they're not able to show the returns that the VCs would have wanted to see. So how do you all make these VCs hold these the funding that they've been getting or they've been giving the CPOs for a longer time to see that return? That's the question for you.
The last question.
Hi. I just want to ask the panel in general. So yesterday we had the IATDP sharing, and they were talking about how EV has to be combined with public transportation for us to meet our emission targets. I was wondering if you could share a bit more about the EV innovation and challenges with public transportation. Thank you.
So should I start? Thais, to your question on São Paulo, I think this is something that's happening in a lot of the countries too, that the transport community are really more focusing on the vehicle itself and not understanding as a huge piece the energy side. We are transport experts, most of us working on those projects, and we think energy side is going to be figured out after we manage to have the buses or the trucks or the 2 and 3-wheelers. And it's going to be easy. It's not easy. We need to bring energy since the beginning. It's a central piece of the project. So when we started to talk about the buses in São Paulo, we should bring, it was there, but was not exactly the official process that each country has. So each country has some laws for the energy systems, like in Brazil, they can take up to 2 years to be able to adapt the grid by the Brazilian law. So if you didn't start the official process since the beginning, right now they can be delaying, if they want, 2 years, the entire process to do the upgrades on the grid. So we also need to understand the central piece. So for São Paulo itself, I think right now it's almost there, in my view, but it's really bringing the grid and all the energy sector since the beginning, because this is e-mobility, is not only transport, is energy transition. So we need to be able to bring energy since day zero of any project to be sure that this is going to happen. So I think right now it's almost there. They can do a lot of renewables as part of it. So if you don't want to depend on the grid, as the formal system is most of the cities or countries, you can see how you can generate your energy. We know that the efficiency is not enough for charging a lot of buses, but we have ways to starting trickling down this innovation. So it's not one question easy to answer, because if not, it's going to be solved out already. And talking a little bit on public transport, I completely agree with the last question, that e-mobility is much more than a transition for one type of vehicle for another, but it's bringing a huge opportunity in the countries in the global south to transition the entire system. So we are seeing a lot of new business models coming in Latin America, changing for the traditional bus market that we only have one operator that own the bus, on the terminals, on the entire thing, to the different models that we have one provider for buses, one operator for providing only the service. We can also see someone bringing the charging infrastructure. So we are bringing new stakeholders to the table, and we can really use e-mobility as a revolution to the next point of some solutions that we as transport communities have been talking for some time and not being able to do it. We are seeing that e-mobility can be the entry point for us to do a system change in how mobility is being delivered in our city. So to Ryan's question in the beginning, for one word for me, I think it's revolution. Mobility is really being able to bring this revolution to cities, countries, and citizens itself. So it's also giving access to better and improved quality of service systems for them, being buses or 2 and 3-wheelers that are happening in Africa and in Southeast Asia, to give them the opportunity to access jobs, leisure, whatever they want. And e-mobility is being able to start this revolution right now.
Very much, Matt.
Yeah. Just to quickly piggyback on what Christina said in the last question on public transit, I think public transit agencies need to get out of the mindset that the only way to move people is trains and buses. That is wrong. It's an ecosystem. And the Federal Transit Agency or administration in the United States had this thing called the Mobility on Demand Sandbox program that demonstrated, in my opinion, based on the reports, that doing first and last mile partnerships with Uber and Lyft and taxis work. It's cheaper. You don't, on off-peak hours, if you go to a transportation desert and you've taken the bus and the train and you're there and you're stranded, you're going to have to pay 10 times the amount to take an Uber. Government should be subsidizing that, and they should be creating mobility hubs in these two-fare suburban zones where you get off the train. And great, it's great to have buses and trains that are electric, but there should be charging stations there with, and Tesla, could even have automated EVs, as Waymo does, that is subsidized, that will take you in shuttles to your last mile, or you can have an EV charging station there to deploy these vehicles as part of the transit system or mobility as a service connected with an app that will drive people to transit. The experiments have worked. For some reason, the transit agencies are concerned about liability and they haven't scaled this. But once the federal government in the US makes funding available, mobility hubs in two-fare zones with EV charging stations and even bike charging and stuff like that is the future, in my opinion. And we can't get there fast enough, but they have to change the mindset. I would say Revel. Revel is a company that's the most exciting thing that I've seen. Tesla remains to be seen whether what Elon's doing with EVs and automation works. In Las Vegas, they're planning, a loop where EV Teslas are going to take people around the strip and destroy the taxi industry. Revel is the only company I can think of that actually made a business model based around owning property, charging stations, and employing drivers. Remember, everybody else is not getting a paycheck. They're independent contractors, putting them to work, giving them benefits, and painting their cars blue. And that is a great sign in my industry, because people are not fighting it. They're embracing it, this company. And we need more of that, where they make money on this business model and are able to generate money outside the industry, because they allow people who aren't taxi drivers to charge as well.
You're super interesting. Your definition of a word is
well, you should have defined what word means. Anyway.
So to answer the question from my colleague from WR India, basically low utilization is the bane of existence for a lot of charge point operators, not just in India, but literally everywhere. And if you are a charge point operator, you can't survive on 3 to 4% utilization rates. That is so low. Like, you turn a profit starting around 30% utilization and above, right? So you have a long cliff there to get to that point where those stations are suddenly becoming profitable and you can get the money to put in new ones. So what do? Well, you got to reduce your costs and you got to increase your profits. So reduce costs. I've seen some interesting programs around collaborations with utilities that are willing to give you a break on things like demand charges until you've hit that 30% utilization threshold, or reduce your energy costs at a rate that's a little bit more economic. There's other ways of maybe spreading some of those costs, especially around the infrastructure installation themselves. So creating like skids, so charging on a skid sort of a thing, so you can actually reduce costs for that infrastructure investment. On the deployment side, obviously you want to get more cars to your chargers. Maybe the fact that it's low utilization is a symptom of low reliability. And so people don't go to those stations because they know they're constantly broken, or there's cable theft, or there's something going on there that's causing them not to have a lot of uptime. So tackling the reliability issue is really important. And then also getting people to drive further distances. So if a lot of people are charging at home, they're really only within a 50-mile radius, they may not need public charging. So we've got to get more people to drive between corridors and use that corridor charging to get from one place to another. And so how do you put charging in a way that actually allows people to use their cars in different ways? And so another way would be encouraging more local rideshare to convert to electric vehicles and creating a local demand for that charging infrastructure. So there's a lot of different ways, different levers to get support for public infrastructure. But the number one thing is this stuff is not going to be immediately profitable when you have low rates of electric vehicles in your country or region. So across the board, we've got to work on getting more vehicles out there. The thing that I'm most optimistic about is cost parity. So the decline in battery cost is good for this industry, it's good for the consumer, it's good for everybody.
Jason, let's go to you for your word or sentence, and then Josh, and then Mr.
I'm going to cheat and do two answers: a domestic and a global. Domestic, I think NACS is going to be very meaningful for customer experience for EV ownership. Just making it simpler. And globally, I think exactly what Erica said, declining kilowatt hour costs, the progress with LFP, and then solid state that's coming. It's all just very optimistic for lower EV costs.
Yeah, I would just say so for something useful, and especially non-US context is on transformers. That's the biggest bottleneck we're facing right now in Rwanda and Kenya, is that the utilities, we want a lot of transformers. We want to put them together and combine charging, teaming up with other companies. But the way that the rules are constructed and qualifying for EV tariffs, and also just the working capital that the utilities have, they have a certain inventory of 250, 400, 800 kVA transformers. So we're working with Bazigo, who some of you saw speak this morning. So we need just those utilities need the working capital to have inventory and stock of transformers, so we're not waiting another 6 months for them to arrive on the boat. Information you can use, I hope.
Yeah. So for us, I think the most encouraging part is the public buses, because they sort of provide a beginning point for the whole EV landscape. They are easy to deploy. The charging stations are centralized, and they instantly bring in the OPEX advantage for to pass on to general public. So that's something we have started, and we think this will trigger the whole EV landscape.
Let's get a couple of photos. Yeah. Oh, good idea. Hey, the definition of a word where I come from, I speak fast. So from Brooklyn.